Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot on Big Italy 42. And I'm talking about the final Tuesday slate of the MLB season. And on the surface, it looks like a great slate. Lots of options, lots of pitchers, lots of offenses in good spots. And then if you look outside your window, especially if you live on the East Coast or the Midwest like I do, it's a whole lot of rain and a whole lot of ugliness. And not a whole lot different when you look at these games. So I'm going to start off by telling you some games that have threats. Obviously, I'm no meteorologist. You're going to have to find that information elsewhere. You can always find me on Twitter at BigItaly42 later on. If I have information I found from someone else, I'll certainly pass that along. But to give you the ones that you should be concerned about, and this is important because I'll talk about some players, that I'm considering either way in some of these games, but certainly got to make sure that these games actually play beforehand. And this late in the season, especially with teams already eliminated and things of that nature, maybe we do see some postponements, maybe some cancellations completely. So definitely very, very important tonight to monitor that. So I'll tell you the ones that look bad. St. Louis and Pittsburgh, from what I'm hearing, rain all night long. Looks bad. Probably not a very good chance that they play that game tonight. Cincinnati hosting Chicago. I live about 100 miles north of Cincinnati. It's been raining here all day. It's been muggy. Doesn't look pretty. It's supposed to rain here the rest of the day as well. From what I'm hearing, it's supposed to be the same down in Cincinnati as well. So that one also looks pretty bad. Toronto at Baltimore. Looks like heavy rain, potential flooding. So that one's bad as well. You've got somewhat rain for the Philadelphia game, hosting the Mets. The Yankees hosting Boston. Cleveland hosting Minnesota. And then a little bit in Atlanta, but not quite as much. So almost half the games on the slate tonight with big-time weather concerns. So that's going to be huge for you tonight if you're playing cash games. And cash games are going to be really tough tonight. I'll try to help you out with those as much as possible. But this may be a great night to just focus on GPPs because the last thing you want is some zeros in your lineup because of games that got postponed or maybe canceled altogether. So let's go ahead and start things off here with starting pitcher. There's a lot of them on the mound. You got Kershaw versus Bumgarner. Bumgarner, $2,500 less than Kershaw. Obviously, this is a pride situation for San Francisco, technically. I mean, they're not officially eliminated yet, but they'll have to win out. I believe they'll have to win out, and the Dodgers will have to lose every game. So correct me on that if I'm wrong, but something of that nature. So either way, this is certainly a game that still matters to some degree, and you got two of the best pitchers in the league. 5.5 run total. You're certainly not playing any hitters from this game. Take your pick with the pitchers. I mean, obviously, Kershaw, higher upside slightly. But for $2,500 less, I don't mind taking Bumgarner here. You want some safe options. There's not a lot of them on tonight's slate, so I think Bumgarner makes a lot of sense at 12-4. Tyson Ross at home against Milwaukee, I think is probably your best upper mid-tier range option there. At $10,300 against Milwaukee. He's a nice favorite of -170 and a 7-run total at Petco, so I think he's a great option there. You got Cole Hamels against Detroit. Detroit's great against lefties, and Hamels, I mean, he had 12 strikeouts against Seattle. Outside of that, no more than 4 in each of his last 3 starts, despite going 6 or 7 innings in all those. So it's a Detroit team that's very good against lefties. Obviously not a whole lot to play for them, but it's a very meaningful game for Texas. So he's certainly a guy you consider as well. No weather concerns there in Texas. Not touching Waka or Morton due to the rain there. Michael Pineda, not a guy I was really looking at anyway. Also some rain concerns there. Mike Fiers at Seattle. He's a guy that I like in tournaments. I don't like him in cash games, really. It is a nice hitter's park, a nice upgrade for him. We know his upside, of course, with that no-hitter he threw against the Dodgers. We also know he has not a great floor, but when he gets it going, he certainly has some potential to put up strong numbers, so I like that. I would like Marcus Stroman, but I don't like the weather concerns there, so that's another no for me. Johnny Cueto and Jeff Samardzija, we're looking at big time win. We're talking Wrigley Field gusts in Chicago, and so for that reason, I'm probably not playing Cueto or Samardzija either. Cueto does a pretty good job keeping the ball on the ground, so does Samardzija, but no thanks there. Bartolo Colon seems like the guy in the best spot there at $7,000, but at the same time, more weather concerns. But we have seen Bartolo Colon just absolutely dominate this Philly lineup Last 2 starts against them, 15 innings, 9 hits, 3 walks, 17 strikeouts, and no earned runs. Doesn't seem to be able to strike out anyone else on any other team, but if this game goes, if we hear clear, potential small delay, something like that, Bartolo Colon makes a lot of sense for your cash games if we get some clarification on the weather. Outside of that, an interesting one for me that I actually love in tournaments is Robbie Ray, coming off a good performance at the Dodgers. He's at home. This game does have the highest total of the night, but facing the Colorado team on the road is abysmal against left-handed pitching. They're terrible. Robbie Ray is a guy that does have upside over the past 30 days. He's a guy that's pitched fairly well, like I mentioned that last start, but 25.7% strikeout rate, 53% ground ball rate. His walk rate's concerning at 12.4, but 11.1% swing and strike rate. Lots going for him tonight at that cheap price tag. And like I said, there's not many guys that don't have weather concerns tonight, so I'm looking at that. And then my sneaky play, this was the guy I was all in on last time. If you listened to any of the podcasts last time he pitched, Adam Conley. This guy has been tremendous over the past month. He's $6,300, and then here comes the bad part. He's facing Tampa Bay, as we know, one of the best teams in all of baseball against left-handed pitching, and over the second half of the season, I don't know, depends on what numbers you look at, but I think they've been the best in all of baseball in the second half against lefties, and I'm sure the numbers don't lie with that. But Adam Conley over the last month, 0.40 home runs per 9, 27% strikeout rate, 7.6% walk rate. It's not terrible, but what's really impressive is the hard hit rate, 18.6%, the best among any qualified pitcher on tonight's slate over the last 30 days, and it's not even really particularly close. So he's been tremendous over the past 30 days. I love him tonight in tournaments because I think a lot of people will be stacking their Tampa Bay Rays, and that's not to say that I won't be doing that in a few tournaments myself, but I do think Adam Conley, lowest owned pitcher in a dome. You don't have to worry about the weather concerns. Yes, there's risk, but at least the risk isn't going to be rain and storms and flooding. So outside of that, I'm not in love with any of these cheap guys here. You've got guys like Vidal Nuno who had that random great game against Texas, facing off against a strikeout-prone team in Houston, who you could certainly consider at $4,200 just because he's so cheap, but not much of a floor. When he's bad, he's very bad. So I don't love that spot for him. None of these other guys really give me any sort of confidence. Daniel Norris has been a guy who's been okay. Doesn't pitch deep into games, doesn't throw a lot of pitches, though. $5,500. So those are the guys that I'll probably be going with more often than not. Catcher options. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Cubs, Reds hitters as if they're playing. Like I said, doesn't look good, but it's possible they play, so I'm not going to leave him out. Kyle Schwarber, if he plays, you've got to love him against Josh Smith. Josh Smith is a guy who has only faced 50 left-handed batters this season, but he's allowing a .492 WOBA. Got to love him tonight. Travis d'Arnaud at Philly. Maybe hitters will be all right in this one. David Buchanan giving up a ton of hard contact. You got to like that. Russell Martin, another guy in a bad weather situation, but in a good spot against Miguel Gonzalez, who gives up a ton of home runs and a ton of fly balls, 1.53 home runs per 9. That's a great spot for him. Outside of that, you're going to look for cheaper guys. Wellington Castillo or Jared Saltalamacchia, whichever one faces Bergman tonight, I think is in a fine spot. You're going to have to find guys, like I said, that are not in weather concerns. That's one. Then you've got Stephen Vogt there at $3,400 against Nick Tropiano is an okay option. Derek Norris faces the lefty and Lopez tonight. Norris bringing this disappointing season to a close, but he's still a guy who hasn't been terrible this season. Still a good hitter against left-handed pitching. And then outside of that, Willen Rosario, if you're not playing Robbie Ray, $2,600 first base catcher. Certainly not wasting your first base spot on him, but he's a guy that crushes left-handed pitching throughout his career. First base options. Edwin Encarnacion at Baltimore, got to be your top option if you're paying up. Also, if the weather holds up. Joey Votto, absolutely love. Homered last time he faced Dan Herron, I think on the second pitch. And he's a guy that just has a great high floor. But Mother Nature might not let him have a high floor tonight. So once again, keep your eye on that. Paul Goldschmidt against Bergman at 57 at home. You got to like any of the Mets batters that are first base eligible. You got Lucas Duda. You got Michael Kadire. Either one of those guys, you assume Duda will be in, Kadire should be. Both those guys in good spots. Greg Bird against Porcello, who struggles with lefties throughout his career. I like that one as well. Scrolling down a little bit further, there's not a lot to love. I like Carlos Santana against Kyle Gibson. Gibson's a contact pitcher. That doesn't bode well for pitchers against the Indians who put the ball in play very well already. Albert Pujols did hit a homer last night. Seems like that's the only thing he ever does. And, I mean, he's been awful in the second half, but he's still hitting home runs. So you give him a look in your tournaments there for that reason. I really like Jose Abreu against Johnny Cueto in tournaments. $3,900. Cueto giving up the most hard contact of any of the pitchers on tonight's slate over the last 30 days, over 39%. Wind blowing out in gusts. I have zero faith in either of these pitchers. If I'm going to take one side here, it's going to be a power hitter with these type of conditions. So he's on board there. For me, Jose Altuve against the lefty here at second base. You got to like against Nuno. Jason Kipnis against contact pitcher, like I mentioned, and Kyle Gibson. He's a fine spot. Once again, Mets hitters. Mets have the highest total in the night. Only team with 5-run team total. Daniel Murphy, you certainly have to consider there. If you're not playing Adam Conley, which most of you probably are not, Logan Forsythe at $4,200. We know the drill by now. The guy absolutely kills left-handed pitching. Ben Zobrist, absolutely love him tonight. He's probably the guy that I'll put into a cash game lineup if I'm making cash games tonight on this weather-filled slate against Jeff Samardzija. Jeff Samardzija, as we know, a righty who has struggled with left-handed batters this season. 356 WOBA, 19 home runs. Zobrist crushing right-handed pitching. Lots going his favor in that cheap price tag. Absolutely love him. Anthony Rendon at 37 is in a fine spot as well. Chris Coughlin, Neil Walker, I like both those guys, but on the wrong side of being likely to play. So, I mean, it's a really tough night with guys like that. I certainly don't want to leave them out, but I don't have much faith that those games play either, though. Outside of that, at second base, really nothing else that I feel like reaching down for. Third base options, of course, Josh Donaldson. If that game plays, $5,400, you have to love him. Nolan Arenado gets a lefty. He has been much better against righties, but coming off a couple huge performances and not a bad park shift either, going to Chase Field from Coors Field. Chris Bryant, another weather concern, but I think the guy that you feel the safest about, safest weather, hitting well, it's got to be Adrian Beltre against the lefty at Norris. I mentioned Norris has pitched well, but Beltre's been incredible in the second half. Definitely going to get myself some shares of him. David Wright as well. And Miguel Sano, I mean, if all these games end up not playing, Miguel Sano, I mean, it's another one of those weather concerns. So keep that in mind there as you're building that lineup. Alex Rodriguez against Porcello. He's been smashing the ball, tons of power. Of course, Evan Longoria against the lefty is always going to be in play for you there. Cheaper options, not a whole lot to see down here. You get Jonathan Scope, who I mentioned yesterday, is great against right-handed pitching. Had an okay game, but Stroman's been pitching well. Weather concerns, that's probably going to take him out there for me. Kyle Seager against Mike Fiers is an interesting option. He does kill right-handed pitching. Quietly having a pretty good season here, too. So definitely keep that guy on your radar there as well. And then if you're just trying to chase some power, Marcus Semien does have that. Homered last night, going out against the Angels and Nick Tropiano, who Tropiano has been okay over the past month, but he's certainly not a guy that I'm shying away from with a couple bats here. Shortstop options, as it usually is, Francisco Lindor against anyone, switch hitter. Carlos Correa against the lefty. You got to love those guys. I'm not playing Corey Seager against Madison Bumgarner. You go ahead and do that if you'd like. I mean, at least there's no weather concerns. You just have to worry about facing Madison Bumgarner, which is probably worse than dealing with the weather in most situations. Other shortstop options, if they play Eugenio Suarez against Dan Herron, tons of power there at home. Obviously, huge concerns there. So I'm not banking on that happening, but certainly to keep in the back of your mind there just in case. Other options for you, if you're not playing Bartolo Colon, you got Andres Blanco, Freddie Galvis, both guys from the left side of the plate that have a chance against him because it does have weakness. It certainly isn't the Phillies, but it's left-handed batters. So you give him a look, and then Marwin Gonzalez, as he usually is, my cheap play at shortstop, $2,700 against the lefty Nuno. And then Tim Beckham, if he's in, like I said, I really like Adam Conley. It's not a great spot for him, though, and he's a GPP-only option still, but Tim Beckham does hit left-handed pitching very well. Outfield options, A.J. Pollock is your most expensive hitter. I wouldn't quite have him up there at number one, but I think he's in a great spot against Bergman tonight. Excuse me. Outside of those two guys, I think my top two hitters have got to be Yoenis Cespedes against David Buchanan at $4,800 and Bryce Harper against Matt Whistler. Matt Whistler, horrible against lefties, 449 WOBA allowed, and Bryce Harper facing off against him. First game back after his fight with Jonathan Papelbon. And he got the day off yesterday for rest. Got to imagine he wants to finish the season strong and try to finish off what should be an MVP campaign for him. So I absolutely love him in this spot. Probably the best spot he's going to have the rest of the season. Of course, Mike Trout in play was a guy that was a big disappointment for people who paid for him last night, but I would do that 100 times out of 100 against Felix Doubront. Other options for you, if they play Michael Brantley against Gibson, is in an okay spot. Gibson's actually been pretty good against lefties. Outside of that, I love the Mets bats. Anyone you can get, Granderson, Conforto, Kadire has outfield eligibility. Those guys are all in very good spots there. Outside of that, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. George Springer seems way too cheap at $4,200 against Nuno. Homered and hit a double last night. This guy wants to finish strong as they move into the postseason, and he's looking good. So then you look at any of the lefties for the Yankees. Porcello has pitched well since he's returned, but Gardner, Ellsbury, Beltran, if those guys all play, I really like all of them. That's one of my favorite stacks if that game plays, because I think some people will be on Porcello. And it's not to say that he's a terrible pitcher. He has pitched well, but I don't quite believe that he's as good now as he has been recently. I'm throwing in Adam Eaton with that wind blowing out against Johnny Cueto. I hate picking on Johnny Cueto. I love him, but this is not a good spot for either one of these pitchers. Lorenzo Cain, of course, with a ton of power for Kansas City. Throw him out there as well. I should have mentioned on my list here, actually, I have Eric Hosmer as well and Kendrys Morales for the Kansas City Royals. So throw those guys in there as well. I don't know how I skipped over them. Franklin Gutierrez against Flyers. I mean, Gutierrez is having a hell of a second half here. Got to put him in play for you there. Steven Souza, once again, if you're not playing Conley, the guy has a ton of power. He's sitting there at $3,700. Not a bad option there. Scrolling all the way down for some cheaper guys. You're hoping to get some good spots. There really aren't very many. Like I said, Melky Cabrera certainly has upside at $3,400 against Johnny Cueto. Excuse me. And then other guys, if you want some contrarian plays, Justin Upton, Matt Kemp, both those guys against the lefty at home. Those guys are a nice little mini stack there. I like Josh Reddick quite a bit at $3,900 as well. And then your cheap, I guess you could call it a BVP play. Scott Van Slyke does kill lefties. He's also 9 for 24 off Madison Bumgarner. He's almost absolute minimum at $2,100. So I'll give him a look one time out of one of my mini GPP lineups. And that'll wrap things up for us here. Like I said, do not forget about the weather. Don't be the guy that ends up with, or girl, that ends up with a bunch of zeros in our lineup because they didn't pay attention to the weather. It's an ugly one out there, but certainly some value, some opportunity to be had in the games that we do feel good about tonight. So, like I said, if you have any questions, find me on Twitter at BigItaly42. We are at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out the rest of our great content as we close out the MLB season. Got NFL, college football, and everything else in between. And we'll see you guys next time.